Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. This show will address a very specific and contemporary topic, the situation in the world, the conflict which exists in places like North Korea, Syria, Iran, the economic crisis which has recently taken place in Cyprus, the economic insecurity in other parts of Europe as well. In general, there is a great deal of world disorder because of the fact that a lot of people, I think, are very concerned and confused about what is happening. I will throw in my 2 cents on what I think are the major issues that are involved. First, let me go back to Roy Bhaskar's critical realism, and especially his philosophy of metaReality, the latest version of critical realism. Roy Bhaskar, to my understanding, talks about 3 different levels of the real. The highest level is what he calls metaReality, or the cosmic envelope, or co-presence, or non-duality, or the ground state. I think all of those terms refer roughly to the same basic condition. In other words, the condition of unity in diversity, or unity in difference, as Bhaskar calls it. Below that is the condition of relative reality. Relative reality is difference, as I see it, or diversity. Then directly below the condition of relative reality is Demi-reality. Demi-reality is something like disunity in diversity. So in other words, diversity is a given. Creation is a very diverse existence. What we do with it, on what level we choose to function in that creation, is up to us. And it would appear to me, by looking at the world, that we have made the decision, unfortunately, to continue living on this level of demi-reality, or disunity in diversity. As long as we do that, the world will continue to stumble along and eventually, I think, reach some sort of crisis. Perhaps what Baha'u'llah referred to as the most great convulsion. Sometimes I think that we might be on the verge of it, perhaps even into it right now. Things certainly do seem to be at a fever pitch. The world is very anxious and nervous about events in North Korea and other places. Exactly what happens, only God and His prophets know, and His chosen ones. But at least we can comfort ourselves by perhaps having a more informed perspective on these events. So this will be my contribution to that. This is taken from a book which I wrote called Unitive Socialism. This part of the book is not specifically about socialism, it's more generally about what I call the Great Unraveling, in other words, the gradual, sometimes rapid, disintegration of the present or old world order. And here's what I wrote in the book in one place. I'll go ahead and read that for you. Each of us occupies a front row seat to one of the greatest dramas in human history, the great unraveling of a global economic and political order. Corporate capitalism, which was once widely imagined to have defeated Soviet communism in the Cold War, might, as some now fear, be on the verge of collapse. Shattering all illusions, the emperor, a marauding economic system born from human greed while disguised as a profit motive, has had no clothes. Revolutions, uprisings, political repression, and climate change are among its legacies of moral contradiction. In other words, things are falling apart. The world isn't working very well. Here is how this issue was addressed in a document called One Common Faith, which was written by the Baha'i international community under the supervision of the Universal House of Justice. This is an excerpt from that document. Few will disagree that the universal disease sapping the health of the body of humankind is that of disunity. Its manifestations everywhere cripple political will, debilitate the collective urge to change, and poison national and religious relationships. How strange, then, that unity is regarded as a goal to be attained, if at all, in a distant future, after a host of disorders in social, political, economic, and moral life have been addressed and somehow or another resolved. Yet the latter are essentially symptoms and side effects of the problem, not its root cause. Why has so fundamental an inversion of reality come to be widely accepted? The answer is presumably because the achievement of genuine unity of heart and mind among peoples, whose experiences are deeply at variance, is thought to be entirely beyond the capacity of society's existing institutions. While this tacit admission is a welcome advance over the understanding of processes of social evolution that prevailed a few decades ago, it is of limited practical assistance in responding to the challenge. Unity is a condition of the human spirit. Education can support and enhance it, as can legislation, but they can do so only once it emerges and has established itself as a compelling force in social life. A global intelligentsia, its prescriptions largely shaped by materialistic misconceptions of reality, clings tenaciously to the hope that imaginative social engineering, supported by political compromise, may indefinitely postpone the potential disasters that few deny loom over humanity's future. What a beautiful passage. It reminds me of a similar passage in some ways that was written back in 1954 by the guardian of the cause of God, Shoghi Effendi. In this next quotation, Shoghi Effendi condemned the cancerous growth of economic materialism, including both communism and so-called free market capitalism. Here is the quotation. It is taken from the book Citadel of Faith. Pervading all departments of life, an evil which the nation, the United States, and indeed all those within the capitalist system, though to a lesser degree, share with that state, the former Soviet Union, and its satellites regarded as the sworn enemies of that system, is the crass materialism which lays excessive and ever-increasing emphasis on material well-being, forgetful of those things of the spirit on which alone a sure and stable foundation can be laid for human society. It is the same cancerous materialism, born originally in Europe, carried to excess in the North American continent, contaminating the Asiatic peoples and nations, spreading its ominous tentacles to the borders of Africa, and now invading its very heart, which Baha'u'llah, in unequivocal and emphatic language, denounced in his writings, comparing it to a devouring flame and regarding it as the chief factor in precipitating the dire ordeals and world-shaking crises that must necessarily involve the burning of cities and the spread of terror and consternation in the hearts of men. Indeed, a foretaste of the devastation which this consuming fire will wreak upon the world, and with which it will lay waste the cities of the nations participating in this tragic world-engulfing contest, has been afforded by the last World War, marking the second stage in the global havoc which humanity, forgetful of its God and heedless of the clear warnings uttered by his appointed messenger for this day, must, alas, inevitably experience. It is this same pervasive, pernicious materialism against which the voice of the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant was raised, with pathetic persistence, from platform and pulpit, in his address to the heedless multitudes, which, on the morrow of his fateful visit to both Europe and America, found themselves suddenly swept into the vortex of a tempest, which in its range and severity was unsurpassed in the world's history. So there it is, a warning of the direction that the world is going in. It was a warning which was issued back in 1954. In my opinion, it was given in the context of the world situation at that time. Of course, there was a Cold War going on between the former Soviet Union and the United States, including the allies of both of those countries. Now there is no more Soviet Union, which is broken up and now includes Russia, the Ukraine, and many other countries. Germany has been reunited. Yugoslavia has been broken up. Czechoslovakia likewise. But the same basic pattern continues. We still see that same cancerous materialism spreading around the world. It's morphed. It's manifesting in somewhat different ways, but it's still around. And in that sense, Shoghi Effendi's warning to us is certainly as relevant, if not more so, right now than it was back in 1954 when he wrote that letter. In 1985, the Universal House of Justice made a ruling by its divine authority on the injustices of all oppressive economic systems, whether East or West. So-called communism, or state capitalism as some have called it, has with very few exceptions already crumbled. Bourgeois corporate capitalism, which has now incorporated mainland China and many of the republics of the former Soviet Union, is now struggling for its long-term survival. It seems to be at its end. That system, the capitalist order, with its most avid supporters, could, through presently unfolding events, be the next to fall. Of course, that's speculation on my part, But I think that if we look at the world and the condition in which things are right now, that certainly is the way things appear to me. In light of that, here is a statement that was made by the Universal House of Justice back in 1985. At this time, the Cold War was still going on. There still was a Soviet Union. Germany was still divided. There still was a Czechoslovakia, for example. The House of Justice, in this letter from October 85, called The Promise of World Peace, condemned both socialism and capitalism. In other words, state socialism or state capitalism, as well as Western capitalism. Here is what the House of Justice wrote. In its religion's place, they, referring to increasing numbers of people, have turned either to the hedonistic pursuit of material satisfactions or to the following of man-made ideologies designed to rescue society from the evident evils under which it groans. All too many of these ideologies, alas, instead of embracing the concept of the oneness of mankind and promoting the increase of concord among different peoples, have tended to deify the state, to subordinate the rest of mankind to one nation, race, or class, to attempt to suppress all discussion and interchange of ideas, or to callously abandon starving millions to the operations of a market system that all too clearly is aggravating the plight of the majority of mankind, while enabling small sections to live in a condition of affluence scarcely dreamed of by our forebears. The time has come when those who preach the dogmas of materialism, whether of the East or the West, whether of capitalism or socialism, must give account of the moral stewardship they have presumed to exercise. Why is the vast majority of the world's peoples sinking ever deeper into hunger and wretchedness, when wealth on a scale undreamed of by the pharaohs, the Caesars, or even the imperialist powers of the 19th century is at the disposal of the present arbiters of human affairs? That's the end of the quotation. So, in that statement, the House of Justice condemned the socialist and or communist system, as well as the capitalist system. Communism, for the most part, is gone. For the most part. Of course, Stalinism is still alive in North Korea, but in terms of being a global world-shaping force, it's gone. Capitalism, on the other hand, especially the United States, which in many ways is the leader of global capitalism, is still alive to a degree, although I think kind of tottering along, but still technically alive, I suppose. And I think what we are seeing right now happening, to an extent, is that because of the decline of the capitalist system, many countries that were previously afraid of the United States, for example, rightly or wrongly, are no longer afraid. North Korea is no longer afraid. Of course, North Korea has been making bellicose threats toward the United States for many years, going back to the Korean War in the 1950s, but nothing has approached the level of severity which is taking place right now in April of 2013. It is very much of concern. Some people think that we might be on the verge of another war. Other people think that things will most likely quiet down. Obviously, that is the hope of everyone. We will have to see what happens. In any event, since the communist or socialist system, as it was formulated back in the early part of the 20th century, in terms of Leninism and Stalinism, is now mostly gone, what we really have to be concerned about is the global capitalist system. For as long as it survives, for as long as, using the words of the House of Justice, the market system continues to aggravate the plight of the majority of mankind, things will continue to get worse. The House of Justice has made its decision. They have made a ruling. The world, unfortunately, has not paid any attention. Perhaps they don't know about it. Regardless, the House of Justice has expressed God's will, and it is our responsibility as the creation of God, as as human beings with tremendous capacity, with immortal souls, to rise up and demand that something change, that we move from the condition of disorder and disunity into a new world order of unity. That does not seem to be happening, and so I think that it is what we're seeing in the world. We are seeing the collapse of the present system. Things seem to be happening rather slowly until relatively recently. Now it appears to me that everything is speeding up. So that is why I said that I feel as though in some sense we might be in what Baha'u'llah called the most great convulsion right now, or if not in it, at least on the edges of it. Exactly what will happen, no one knows. Perhaps North Korea won't even be involved. But it looks like how things will shape up will be North Korea, perhaps Syria, perhaps Iran, many other countries as well, might become focal points of tension in the world, which will drive various nations with different conflicting interests into an arena of war. Given the climate changes, the predictions of comets and asteroids and meteors this year, 2013, that will simply aggravate the problem. Given the high level of climate change, weather change, which in and of itself is a national security or homeland security issue, again, more problems to make the situation worse. So I think that most of us are just ordinary human beings. We don't have the power to step in and bring about any change. What we can do is we can share our hearts with other people. If we are Baha'is, we can give the message of Baha'u'llah to other people. If you are interested in the Baha'i Faith, I would encourage you to go to the official website for the Baha'i World, and I will put a link to that directly below this program. It is Baha'i.org, which is BAHAI.org. I would encourage you to go there to investigate the Baha'i Faith as well as to look at my own sites, and I have a lot of information on the Baha'i Faith according to my own understandings as well. Please be safe. Please pray. Please don't get upset or nervous. Don't worry. Remember that this world is only our temporary home. Regardless of what happens to us here, regardless of what happens to the world itself, ultimately does not matter. Ultimately, we are only here for a small fraction of time. This is an interlude between life in the fetus and life in the world beyond. When we pass the interlude, we move into our absolute eternities. That is the world of fulfillment, of peace, of contentment, where all of these difficulties, these materialistic difficulties, will be resolved. Until next time, this is Dr. Mark A. Foster. Have a good one.